Okay, so I'm gonna go into a teaching today about I'm gonna talk about Jacob and Rachel, and then a little something about Jonathan and David's relationship. Um, Again, this is stuff I like teaching about stuff that you don't generally hear at church. You don't generally hear pastors or teachers talk about very much. Um, so this is there's a couple of things here that are really significant that is generally missed. Um, it's either missed because they just don't see it, or it's intentionally not talked about. Um, but I want to talk about Jacob, how it was actually Jacob who cursed Rachel to death, and that's Bible, that's Scripture. I'm going to show you that, and then I'm going to talk about Jonathan and basically his folly and how he like missed his opportunity that led to his death. So and uh, anyway, these both have um, these are real world lessons. These are really good things to point out in Scripture that that definitely have relevance for today. So let's start in. I'm going to start in Genesis 31, 31 and 22, and this is when Jacob is he's decided. He's been with Uncle Laban and Leah and Rachel and the maidservants. So he's acquired his wives and had children, and he's worked for Laban for 20 years, and the Lord has called him to go back to his father's house. So I'll start here in Genesis 31 and 22, and I'm just gonna read here for a little while. And Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled, and he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. So Jacob's uncle Laban, Jacob left, and when he found out, then he pursued Jacob. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad." So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and song, with timbrel and harp, and you did not allow me to kiss my sons and daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing." So I think we can kind of assume that Uncle Laban here was probably lying. He was we all know that he was somebody. He was an idol worshiper, and he certainly used trickery and manipulation, and I don't think that would have been so. But anyway, "It is in my power to do harm to you, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad.' And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods?" So Laban he was an idol worshiper, and he had household idols. He had graven images in his house, and Jacob had nothing to do with taking Laban's gods. But what happened was that Rachel, for whatever reason, Rachel took her father's gods when they fled. Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. With whomever you find your gods, okay, here's where it gets interesting. With whomever, so this is Jacob, addressing Laban after he accused him of taking his idols from his house. With whoever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Rachel had stolen the idols. And he said, so whoever you find your, these idols, do not let him live. And Laban went into Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and into the two maids' tents, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols and put them in a camel saddle and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is with me. So basically what she was saying is that she was menstruating or on her period. And he searched but did not find the household idols. So Rachel used her female reproductive cycle and menstruation as an excuse why she couldn't get up, and she was hiding her father's idols, under her. She was sitting on them. And the thing was here is we see back that that Jacob said, with whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. So Jacob pronounces a curse over Rachel, and he did not know that she was the one who stole the idols. Now let's go ahead here. I want to move up to, I want to jump ahead to, there's a resolution to the contention between Jacob and Uncle Laban, and they go their separate ways. And but we want to go ahead here now to Genesis. I'm going to jump ahead to Genesis 35, and let's go 35:16 here. I want to read. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and now this is, I just want to say this is Rachel, and Rachel is, Rachel is pregnant with her second child, Benjamin, I believe his name was. So, but she was, this is where we're ahead in the future here a little ways. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel labored in childbirth, and she had hard labor. Now it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said to her, do not fear, you will have this son also. And so it was, as her soul was departing, for she died. So Rachel died. Then she called his name Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. So I think I'll just leave it right there. So this isn't a coincidence that that Rachel, and you can go back and say that this is Rachel's blood is on her own head because she stole the idols, but it was her husband Jacob who cursed her who declared that that the one who stole Jacob's idols should die. So he pronounced a curse on her, and it's interesting too that she actually used her female reproductive cycle to hide the idols she's stolen. She was sitting on them, and then said that she was on her period or menstruating, and that's why she couldn't get up. And then ultimately in childbirth, she died and bled to death. So that's what happened. Is that she had hard labor. He was born, but then that's sometimes what happens is that they have to today in modern medicine they can generally deal with that, but there's just it was a consequence. It was a curse. Jacob basically cursed his wife, and that came to pass. Pronounced a curse on the one who stole the idols, and so really they were both responsible. What she did was obviously wrong, to bring those cursed objects into the household to begin with. But then Jacob, his tongue, Satan used his tongue to Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but he used Jacob's tongue as a legal right to take Rachel's life. So, this is a really good lesson, and a couple of good lessons in about being attached. One of them is idol worship and being attached to idols, but also Jacob. We need to be careful of our tongue and what we speak, because he didn't actually know that it was his wife who stole the idols, but he declared the judgment of death upon the one who did. So. Anyway, that's I don't hear people. I don't think I've really heard people teach on that. So that's an important. It's something that was very obvious to me. It's like, wow, he's the one who cursed his wife to death. So, let's go to. I want to talk about Jonathan and King David's relationship a little bit. And this is something that that I've had to come to learn and understand. So let's see. We're going to go to. Okay, let's go to. I'm going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 20, and this is to give a little context. This is basically the time when King David really figures out that King Saul. This is David before he became king, but this is when when David is really kind of figuring out that Saul wants to kill him and that he needs to basically flee for his life. And there's some interactions with David and Jonathan. And Jonathan helps David. But there's something really important and kind of tragic about this, and that Jonathan really failed. He failed to see to discern the times and seasons and what was happening and what he was in and what the consequences would be. So, and it ultimately, it cost Jonathan his life because he failed to discern what was the right thing to do. So, then David fled from Noath in Ramah and went and said to Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity, and what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" So Jonathan said to him, "By no means. You shall not die. Indeed, my father will do nothing, either great or small, without first telling me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." So in other words, Jonathan is, David is basically saying to Jonathan, "Man, your dad wants to kill me. Why is he why does he want my life?" And Jonathan is saying, no, I'll figure this out. He'll tell me. Then David took an oath and said, "Your father certainly knows that I have found favor in your eyes, and he has said, 'Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death.'" So Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you yourself desire, I will do it for you." And David said to Jonathan, "Indeed, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king to eat, but let me go that I may hide in the field until the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, 'David earnestly asked permission of me that he might run over to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family.' If he says that thus, it is well, your servant will be safe, but he is very angry. Be sure that evil is determined by him. Therefore, you shall deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. Nevertheless, if there is iniquity in me, kill me yourself, or why should you bring me to your father?" But Jonathan said, "Far be it from you, for I know certainly that evil was determined by my father to come upon you. Then would I not tell you?" So Jonathan is saying, that he's saying, I'll tell you if my father wants to do evil against you. Then David said to Jonathan, "Who will tell me, or what if your father answers you roughly?" And Jonathan said to David, "Come, let us go into the field." So both of them went out into the field, and Jonathan said to David, "The Lord God of Israel is witness. When I have sounded out my father sometime tomorrow or the third day, and indeed there is good toward David, and I do not send to you and tell you, may the Lord do so and much more to Jonathan. But if it pleases my father to do you evil, then I report it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety, and the Lord will be with you as he has been with my father. And you shall not only show me the kindness of the Lord while I still live, that I may not die, but you shall not cut off your kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord has cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "Let the Lord require it at the hand of David's enemies." Now Jonathan again caused David to vow, because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to David, "Tomorrow is a new moon, and you will be missed, because your seat will be empty. And when you have stayed 3 days, go down quickly and come to the place where you hid on the day of the deed, and remade by the stone Ezel. Then I will shoot 3 arrows, one to the side, as though I shot at a target, and there I will send a lad, saying, 'Go find the arrows.' If I expressly say to the lad, 'Look, the arrows are on the side of you, get them and come,' then, as the Lord lives, there is safety for you and no harm. But if I say thus to to the young man, "Look, the arrows are beyond you. Go your way, for the Lord has sent you away." So he's making up Jonathan is making up a way to signal to David whether or not it's safe for him to come back and be with King Saul, or he needs to leave because his life's in danger. "And as for the matter which you and I have spoken of, indeed, the Lord is between you and me forever." So David and Jonathan, have a deep friendship and have, made a covenant together. Then David hid in the field, and when the new moon had come, the king sat down to eat the feast. Now the king sat on his seat, as at other times, on a seat by the wall, and Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, "Something has happened to him. He is unclean." Sure. Okay, so. Nevertheless, Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, "Something has happened to him. He is unclean. Surely he is unclean." And it happened the next day, the second day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan, his son, "Why has the son of Jesse not come to eat, either yesterday or today?" So Jonathan answered Saul, "David earnestly asked permission of me to go to Bethlehem. And he said, 'Please let me go, for our family has a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. And now, if I have found favor in your eyes, please let me get away and see my brothers.' Therefore, he has not come to the king's table." Okay. Then Saul's anger was aroused against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman." So, yeah, King Saul here is like, well, excuse my French, but King Saul here is basically gone batshit crazy. So he calls his own son, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman. Do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse, to your own shame, to the shame of your mother's nakedness?" So yeah, so King Saul here is like, remember that the Spirit of the Lord had left Saul because he had disobeyed God. And and the Lord had sent a demonic spirit to torment him. So basically, Saul now is, he's possessed by a demonic spirit, and God has left him. "For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, you shall not be established, nor your kingdom. Now therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Okay. So there's no more question about what King Saul intends. "And Jonathan answered Saul his father and said to him, 'Why should he be killed? What has he done?' Then Saul cast a spear at him to kill him, by which Jonathan knew that it was determined by his father to kill David. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had treated him shamefully. And it was in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field at the time apportioned with David, and a little lad was with him. Then he said to his lad, 'Now run, find the arrows which I shoot.' As the lad ran, he shot the arrow behind him. When the lad had come to the place where the arrow was which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried out after the lad and said, 'Is not the arrow beyond you?' And Jonathan cried out after the lad, 'Make haste, hurry, do not delay.' So Jonathan's lad gathered up the arrows and came back to his master. But the lad did not know anything, only Jonathan and David knew of the matter. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to his lad and said to him, 'Go carry them to the city.' As soon as the lad had gone, David arose from a place toward the south, fell on his face to the ground, and bowed down 3 times, and they kissed one another, and they wept together, but David more so. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, since we have both sworn in the name of the Lord, saying, May the Lord be between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever." So he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. Okay. This is something that the Lord showed me many years ago. And I don't think I've heard people teach on this. Probably because most people in the church are, they have control issues and ego issues. And they don't want to admit that a lot of leaders in the church today and in history have a little bit of King Saul in them. And some of them a lot of King Saul. So this is basically the end of David having anything to do with Saul and his administration, and he leaves and gathers up, eventually gets together with his group of men, a group of mighty men that kind of basically they live in exile until eventually, for quite a few years, and Saul goes on at least a couple of campaigns, trying to find and slay David, but God always protects David. And eventually, Saul dies, and then David becomes king. But the real tragedy here is that Jonathan ends up dying with his father in battle. So when the appointed time comes and the Philistines slay King Saul, Jonathan is also killed. King Saul's sons die with him in battle. And of course, one of his sons is Jonathan, who was the close friend of David. Jonathan failed to recognize his opportunity to survive when he went out to meet David. Jonathan should have did what Ruth did, and Jonathan should have went with David. If Jonathan would have went with David, he would have survived and been part of David's kingdom. We see this today. Saul was a manipulator. Saul was a control freak. He was somebody who was very insecure. And that led to his sin and his downfall. He was a man pleaser instead of one who obeyed God. It had a lot to do with his ego. In my life, I can think of I had a spiritual mother that I had to get away from. And I also had a spiritual father that I had to cut off and get away from. We see that stuff in the church. We see this, and it turns into control manipulation. It turns into nonsense. We see this stuff. You may have heard of spiritual sons and daughters and armor bearers and all this nonsense. And you got, the super prophet or super preacher. You especially see that in kind of the mega church movement. Like you have like these untouchable ones, and then but there comes a point when you got to recognize that in order for you to go and do what God has called you to go and do, you have to step away. You have to, a lot of times, It was like Abraham, when God called him away from his father's home and land. We have to recognize that there are times in our life where we have to walk away from what's familiar, and like our family, our pastor, our home church. I was raised Roman Catholic. I had to walk away from that. My homeland, I was born and raised in North Dakota, and the Lord called me away from that, and now I'm in Dallas, Texas, and I'm still not fully comfortable here in Dallas, Texas. It feels like I'm in a foreign land compared to where I was like born and raised. Things like that. And this is where a lot of people die. They fail to separate from what they need to separate from to step into the destiny that God has for them. And that's what happened to Jonathan. Jonathan failed to separate from his father's. And the writing was already on the wall. It was already the prophet. The Spirit of God had left Saul. And although many people, it may have looked good from the outside, he won many battles against the enemies of Israel. So from the outside, King Saul may have looked really good, but inside he was bankrupt, and the kingdom had already been taken from him and his lineage and given to David. That had already happened in the, prophetically and in the spirit. That was a done deal. And Saul's kingdom, the kingdom had been taken from Saul. And Jonathan failed to act appropriately and recognize that. And he should have honored David, who the presence of God and the anointing now had rested with. And Jonathan should have went with David and not back to his father's house. And he forfeited his destiny. Jonathan forfeited his destiny, and it cost him his life. I've seen this happen in my life. I'll share some examples. I was married here a number of years ago. It was before I moved to Dallas. I was living in Lubbock, Texas. God had called me to move from North Dakota to Texas, and I lived in Lubbock for like 4 years. But during that time when I was in Lubbock, I met a young lady on Facebook, and we entered into an intimate relationship, and it was God opened that door and caused that to happen. But she lived in California. She lived in San Diego, and I spent a lot of time in San Diego with her. But anyway, she had some serious issues. Some serious unresolved trauma, and chemical addiction, alcohol, specifically issues. But ultimately, she refused to obey the Lord. She refused to submit and come to Dallas. I live in Dallas now, and she refused to obey the Lord, and actually the verse of scripture that the Lord gave me for what happened to Michelle was, I got a prophetic word, because me and Michelle had, God had instructed me. We were together like 14 months, and God instructed me that I had to that I couldn't continue in that relationship. And I had a couple of close brothers in the Lord that had come to the same conclusion, that she was, spiritually, financially, in every way, she was like pulling me down. It turned into a thing where I was kind of repeatedly trying to pull her out of the ditch, and I got her to go through a sozo, and I took her to see, took her to different meetings and ministers and stuff and get prayer for trauma and different things. And I took her in, multiple times to get chemically detoxed, and stuff. But eventually the Lord, showed me that she was not repentant and not willing to, that if I continued, that it would go very not good for me if I continued that relationship. So anyway, we had to separate and get divorced. And I remember one day I was at Upper Room and I was praying, and this was just like a few months after we kind of separated, and I was really wondering about, and I thought, well, maybe this was just a temporary thing, that the Lord would eventually, because there's a lot of prophecy about us being together and ministering together and stuff. Very significant prophetic words that were unmistakable, that basically showed that, the Lord had brought us together on purpose, and, but, I was there, I was at the Upper Room in Dallas, at one of their prayer sets, and I remember I went in there and I tried to engage in worship, and I just felt really put off and kind of weird, and then I just felt like going outside. So I went. This was the old Upper Room location, but out front they used to have these picnic tables, and I remember I went out there and sat at a picnic table, and I just, after being in the prayer set for just 10 minutes or something, and I was just sitting out there in the nice warm sun. And then, like I said, I was kind of pondering about, was this relationship really over? Or, because I still, had, very deep feelings for this lady who is now my ex. And, would have been willing for there to be restoration. But anyway, this brother came walking out. And he was like, oh, hi, and he was actually an African brother from Africa. I don't remember what country now, but, think African accent and stuff. And he was somebody that I know. I went to some different prayer meetings with on Saturday and stuff. But he walked by and he's like, oh, hi, and he's walking, and then he stopped and looked at me, and I think he was just going to his car. And it was like the Lord stopped him, and he came and sat, and he goes, are you okay? Are you doing okay? And I'm like, well, yeah. And so he came and sat down and started talking to me. And he says, I feel like something's not right or whatever. And I said, well, so I started talking to him about Michelle and what had happened. And he was listening. And then I told him, and I said, well, she lives in San Diego. And he got this really perplexed look on his face and said, San Diego? He goes, oh, I see what's going on. He goes, cities have to do with destiny. She's supposed to be with you here in Dallas. He goes, she missed her destiny. Yeah, he goes, it's over. He just basically, I don't remember the exact conversation, but I do remember that part where he said, because she wasn't with me there in Dallas, and cities are attached to destiny, she had missed her destiny. So it was just like Jonathan. Jonathan missed his destiny. And the Lord has never permitted me to, it never came to pass that, me and my ex, Michelle was her name anyway, that relationship would continue. And it's interesting because actually the word that the Lord gave me too, when I was still with Michelle and dealing with her sin and rebellion and disobedience, was what happened with Lot's wife when she turned back. When Lot's wife turned back to look at Sodom and Gomorrah and became a pillar of salt. So those were like the two things. But I just wanted to, I think about, my ex as a good example, who was supposed to be with me and serving the Lord, who missed her destiny. And that was, Jonathan was, because instead of going with David, he stayed in his father's house, which was his death warrant. And I've had to have that happen. Like I said, there's a spiritual father that I had that I tithed to and was part of his church for years. And I was in his church when in my 20s. I was living in California for a short time. I had a spiritual father. I had a spiritual mother too that I had to separate from. And then later on, I had a pastor. I was in his church in California, and it was really amazing, dynamic church and ministry for a time. And then when I moved to North Dakota and got into hauling, truck driving and hauling, got into my crude oil hauling business and stuff, and I tied to his ministry for quite a long time. But eventually there came a time where the Lord called me to separate from him and separate from his ministry and do my own thing. And then I encountered, control and manipulation. And you realize that you've been part of something, and then you realize all of a sudden, at one time it was good and healthy in what you were supposed to do, and then all of a sudden it becomes something that is limiting and controlling and witchcraft, and something isn't right about it, and you have to separate from that. And I've had to go through a number of those season shifts in my life and discern that you have to walk away. Something in the news in the church. Look at, there are people at IHOP that knew that Mike Bickle was a creep, right? You knew that there are people there that knew that guy was demonic, but sat there, and that there are people that realized that guy was demonic, and they got the heck out of there, right? So there's a good example. Mike Bickle was completely corrupt for many years, There's an example. Let me give an example that I see here right now that I see a lot of people talking about. I don't know. Should I say this? I'll say it. She's a big girl. I've actually given her a prophetic word. I'll even share it on here. There's a young lady we see that's started. She's got a ministry in a church. She was prophesied to. I'm just trying to think how to say this. Here's an example, and I believe that she needs to separate. But her Catherine Crick, and the Lord, she started, Apostle Catherine Crick. She was prophesied by a guy from Africa, Gior Davy or something in his name. Prophet Gior Davy, and anyway, he's got and I'll just kind of air quote it, a big ministry in Africa. But there's some stuff about him and that ministry that is off. There's idolatry going on there. It's not just honor, it's idolatry, and it's very strange. And one of the things, the prophetic word that I gave to Catherine Crick was, and it was interesting because she has the same name, but what the Lord showed me is that Catherine Crick's ministry, that the Lord raised her up to answer prayers that Catherine Kuhlman made. Because Catherine Kuhlman was actually grieved that her ministry was not longer than it was. And she wanted to do more for the Lord. She wanted to do more for the Lord. On this earth, in her ministry, she wanted to serve the Lord more. She wanted to accomplish more. And so God raised up Catherine Crick as an answer to Catherine Kuhlman's prayer. And I shared that on a message on YouTube with Catherine Crick. But anyway, Catherine Catherine Crick needs to separate from this guy she calls her spiritual father that prophesied her calling. See, just because somebody prophesies something doesn't mean they're somebody we should be attached to or stay attached to. Catherine Crick needs to separate from George Davy and really come out of and repent of some of that bizarre control, manipulation, that stuff where you're bowing down before people and calling them daddy and stuff like that is that's control, manipulation. You're idolizing people. Jesus said the greatest in the kingdom is a servant of all. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that that's another example. I believe for Catherine Crick's ministry to really come into fullness of what it's supposed to be, she needs to walk away from this guy who prophesied over her. Because somebody, we need to discern the times and the seasons we're in. We need to discern when it's time to, when we need to hold them, when we need to fold them, when we need to walk away, and when we need to run. So we need to be able to discern how to play our cards and the time we're at. I basically just left a church here that I was in several years, and the Lord called me out. And then I tried to go back a couple of times, and I had bad dreams showing me there's bad stuff there. So, and it may look really good from the outside, and there's a lot of people there and it's popular, but we got to discern what's going on. And Jonathan didn't discern, and it cost him his destiny, and it cost him his life. Jonathan could have been a major player. He could have been a right-hand man to David in the kingdom of David, and prosperous and he could have done he could have been right there with David. But instead he died hanging out with his dad who had fallen, who was that was over. Another good example today. Are you sitting? Has God called you and showed you that there's a lot more in your sitting in your religious Assembly of God church or Baptist church or whatever? And, today that's one of the things. People get stuck in their dead religion, their denominational church. And, sometimes you have to walk away from the control. You have to walk away from the old dead religion. You have to step out of, the Assembly of God church and go ahead with the New Apostolic Reformation and go to Bethel or start going to global awakening conferences and really get touched by the Holy Ghost and step into what God has for you instead of sitting into what was something that was, a past wave that had glory, 20, 40, 50, 100 years ago. And yeah, there's something to learn there, but there comes a time when we have to step into the destiny that God has for us and not end up like Jonathan. So that's just, I think I'll wrap that up. I wanted to talk about, I wanted to cover that lesson about Laban and Jacob and how Jacob cursed Rachel. Well, Rachel sinned. She did sin, and brought them idols, stole her father's household idols, and then tried to hide them with her female menstruation cycle, and then unknowingly Jacob cursed her to death. So there's a lesson there about the sin that she did, and there's also a lesson about Jacob and about how we need to think about before we speak and we pronounce a curse like that, before we need to not be just saying things like that. And you see that a fair amount in the Old Testament, where people are making oaths and curse and stuff, saying stuff that's just should never be said. Jesus addresses that later in the Gospels. And then also what we see here, and I can just think of many examples to one degree or another, about Jonathan not discerning the times and seasons that he was in, and that he needed to separate, that he needed to run with David away from Saul's camp. And anyway, it was just sad, when the Lord showed me that. It's just like, oh my gosh, he totally missed it. And I see that today, a lot of people, it's just like they're stuck in religion, they're stuck in what's familiar, what feels comfortable to their flesh, instead of stepping forward and doing what God has shown them. So, and I've seen that, like I said, I seen my ex. I watched her, even though I tried. I watched her, miss her destiny and lose her ministry, lose her calling. And I know the gift and the calling of God is without repentance. I know, but there does come up. People can play games until they. And then the Lord will move on without them and take the other people who are obedient and move them forward. So, yeah, I just wanted to, I'm kind of disappointed that this whole thing with Jonathan and this is really a significant teaching, because I don't think I've ever heard a pastor teach this about Jonathan and David, and about how if David would have left if Jonathan would have walked away from his father's house, he would have had a place in David's kingdom, and that how Jonathan failed. Jonathan knew that his father was corrupt, right? So, there are people, today that the religious church you're sitting in is dead. That God is not breathing on that system anymore. So guess what? It's time to get out of there and move forward and go to the next thing. What's God calling you to do? Is it the old Assembly of God church, and God is calling you to step out and to go to that house church, or your Baptist church, or your Presbyterian church? Is God calling you to go to BSSM, Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry, or some other place where the fire of God is? Whatever it is, it's like, be willing to walk away from the familiar stuff. My entire extended family is Roman Catholic. Are you kidding? I had to walk away from that a long time ago. Actually, right early when I got saved, I did a study, and it was just, discerned that obviously that was not something I could be part of. So, and it's interesting. Early in my Christian walk, I went to I attended several different Assembly of God churches, but today I could never be in them. They're very, I could walk in. I could go to a service or something, but they're very religious and controlling, and they have bylaws and all kinds of man-made nonsense. They're not what they started out as. You go back, it's the Azusa Street revival. And now today we need to be seeking the Lord and saying, Lord, what are you doing today? What's the next wave? What's the next move of God? Where's it? We need to be, we need to be waxing our surfboards and getting them, and be looking for the next set of waves that's coming in, and we can't be like Jonathan, who's sitting with his father, who's now spiritually dead, who became king and won victories 20, 30 years ago. Because if we do that, we're just gonna be like dead, stinky fish. So Anyway, I think I'll just end this here. Man, I can't just, I just can't say this enough. Don't do what Jonathan did. What Jonathan did, a lot of people would look at and say, yeah, he did the right thing. He stood with his father and his family and did the right thing. No, he didn't. He died being stupid. Jonathan died being a fool. He was stupid. He should have took his sword and filled a bag full of clothes and ran for the hills with David. But he failed to discern, he failed to discern that the Assembly of God church he was in was dead, right? He failed to discern that. And that God was moving now in the New Apostolic Reformation, for example. He failed to recognize it, So, yeah, I'm just going to, I gave some examples of stuff that I see, and it's like, you need to, I had a spiritual mother and a spiritual father that I had to walk away from and not be under them and not give the tithe to them anymore. I had to, God has me tithe to a ministry in San Diego that's on fire for the Lord. I tithe right now. I tithe to Jeremy and Miranda Nelson in San Diego, California. They're anointed. They're on fire for God. People are being healed. They go on missionary trips around the world. People are being raised from the dead in that ministry. It's happening. So, and that's where God showed me. He said, tithe to them. So that's where I tithe, So, yeah, we need to tithe. We need to have covenant with people and but, at the same time, we need to discern where that is. Where is life, right? What's alive and what's dead and what's past season stuff. So, yep, Jonathan and David. Tragedy. Jonathan missed it. And so many people today are there's a lot of people today that sit and miss it. So anyway, this video is getting pretty long. I can't, I gave examples and I pointed this out, and when it's time, it's time. When you've grown up enough in the religious place you've been in, and it's time to move where the Spirit tells you to move, you need to get up and you need to go. All right. God bless you. Have a good day. Goodbye.